Hey everyone, and thank you for joining Zweig Group Media and the Zweig Letter exclusive interview series. With almost 25 years of continuous coverage of the design industry, the Zweig Letter is a constant in an ever-changing marketplace. We are bringing you some of the best and brightest minds that our industry has to offer. Today, I am pleased to welcome Ed Friedrichs, former president and CEO of Gensler, who will be joining us today. And consequently, Ed is also a contributor to the Zweig Letter, so it's aptly appropriate that we have him on with us today. Ed, how are you doing this morning?
Wonderful, thanks.
Oh, that's great. Well, it's so good to have you. Well, Ed, I know we talked about having you on this show, and again, as I've explained to our audience in the past, and as I shared with you before we just started this interview, is that the purpose of the Zweig Letter audio series and video series is just to kind of share insights from the different contributors to the Zweig Letter. We've had a magazine a newsletter format that has run for almost 3 decades now, and I can't believe that time has flown like this. But we've asked people like yourself and others to be a part of the tapestry that is the design industry when it comes to explaining and articulating different viewpoints that peers in your industry have gone through or have dealt with, and situations and challenges that come up on a regular basis. And so I'm just excited to have you here today, just to kind of get some of your sagely advice and wisdom. Obviously, you've had some time in the industry. And given that you are out of the day-to-day running of an organization like a Gensler, which is a worldwide company that impacts people on multiple continents, it'd be interesting to hear from you in terms of just your view on things right now and the changing of the guard in the design industry. So, Ed, welcome. I'll give you a hearty welcome from Zweig Media headquarters here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So good to have you.
Great. Delighted to join you.
Yeah. So listen, I guess one of the first questions I would ask you is why don't you just give us a quick snapshot of who Ed Friedrichs is. Just tell us a little bit about you, about your story, and why, why, the design industry is so important to you.
Fine. Um, I began my college career at Stanford in engineering,
Okay.
which seems bizarre, but my father at the time said, "Dumb idea, kid. Architecture is low reward, high risk, so stay away from it."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I dutifully did 3 years of engineering. Finally, my senior year switched to architecture.
Okay.
Stanford did not have an accredited architectural school, so I ended up back at the University of Pennsylvania for a master's degree, which was a great choice at the time. The scion of the school was a wonderful architect, and so I had a great time back there. When I came back to California from University of Pennsylvania, it was just about like the recession in 2008. There was not a job to be found for an architect.
Okay.
So I ended up working for a developer in Marin County in 68, 69. Fortunately, had a wonderful opportunity to learn about the development business, meaning he was his own general contractor. So I was negotiating the subcontracts on his behalf to make sure we got into the houses what I was designing. I met with the planning department to get a tract map approved. I had to meet with the engineers in the county to make sure they'd approved the grading plan. I customized kitchens for housewives. So it was one of those wonderful experiences that taught me a lot about what's the consumer, in this case we're selling tract houses, and what is the developer's point of view about the design business. And of course, if I talk to them about design, that was not what they're interested in. Will it make me money? Can I build it within my budget? Will it sell? So this was a great little bit of tutelage that I needed at that time. So I ran into Art Gensler in a bar in Tiburon one night. It was just one of those crazy circumstances where I had presented a house that I designed for my landlord on a crazy lot in Tiburon. And it had taken us almost a year to get the thing approved. It wasn't fast in those days either in California.
Yeah.
So I gone to the bar with my landlord, with the civil engineer that helped me stake out the property lines. This was a lot, by the way, that was given away with a newspaper subscription in 1915. So you can imagine the metes and bounds of the property were not very exacting.
Right.
Anyway, this big guy's on a bar stool next to me, and he keeps bumping into me. And I finally turned to him. I said, if you'd like my bar stool as well, I'll go down the other end. And he looked at me and said, well, wait a minute. Didn't you make a presentation at the city council tonight? Yeah, I did. So, well, that was terrific. I really liked what you did, and I liked the way you presented it. What do you do? I explained I was working for a developer. He said, well, I've got a little architectural firm in San Francisco. Why don't you come talk to me? It was Art Gensler.
Wow. Wow.
So that was the beginning of my career. When I walked into Art's office, there were 20 people total in the firm, one office in the city, with an array of goofy projects, including a lot of tenant development work. So firm had begun practice to do the tenant improvements for tenants in the Alcoa building in San Francisco, which, by the way, was the first multi-tenant office building ever to be built in San Francisco. Okay. So it was an interesting time and an interesting piece of practice. I spent some time with Art at his house because he lived in Tiburon as well. I'd ride on the ferry boat with him from Tiburon to San Francisco every day. So we had a chance to really trade notes on a lot of ideas about what the practice of architecture should be like. And it was something we both agreed on. And that was that design has value to an organization. The value is, if design is really well executed, it will improve the organization's performance. Now, in the interior design, it's fairly easy to see. If I can reduce absenteeism, if I can create an environment that encourages collaboration among the people in the organization, they'll do better, they'll stay longer, we'll have less turnover. So that was one array of what we looked at. If we were doing an office building, will it lease quickly? Will it command a rent that is at a premium in the marketplace because of its design? Can it be built according to the budget? I mean, we were very much into creating designs that were effective and efficient to build, and we kept metrics on everything we did. We measured everything. We asked a client what were his or her priorities, and then we get the metrics at the beginning of the process of doing the project, and then we measure them again at the end. So when we went to speak to a new client, we had an absolutely marvelous array of evidence. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of evidence-based design. It's used a great deal in the healthcare industry, where hospitals are very concerned about rates of infection, length of patient stay, is the patient asking for a lot of painkillers, or are they doing well in a post-operative state? Evidence-based design really creates metrics that allow you to measure the impact of a design feature or a design approach. So that was from a very early stage of my involvement with the firm, and all of our thinking at the time was a big part of how we created Gensler. And I think to this day, you'll find that it's very much evidence-driven, which means that Gensler still does a tremendous amount of research in various parts of the built environment, just to see what are people looking for? How do we measure? Can design actually cause that effect that we're looking for? So I think that probably carried me through my entire career, that very solid concept of how do we use design to impact the performance of the organizations that we're working for.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I mean, it's a tenet of business in general, right? I mean, it's the idea that firms and companies need to listen to the customer, and they need to understand what the customer wants. Too often we go and build these iconic towers and iconic designs, and they're actually for the person designing or creating them, and not for the end user.
That's the truth.
Yeah, and it's a huge disconnect, I think, that we see across business spectrums. But it's interesting that you mentioned that in the design industry, it's got to be the biggest buzzkill that you would have is that someone would create something for you that's really not for you.
Yeah, right. And that often happens. I hear that complaint from clients that have worked with another architect frequently, and it's a sad story in the design professions.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, obviously, we have to be more cognizant of what our clients are asking for, and I certainly, I would encourage our listeners and those that are watching this or listening to it on podcast to really take heed. I think that advice is really strong, but you also said something else in there that really resonated with me earlier about just your interactions with Art Gensler, and I think there is something there, and it sounds like he was maybe a primary mentor for you
Oh, absolutely.
as you got into the industry. Would you speak specifically to the importance of mentoring and definitely with this next generation? Because I'm personally I'm 46. And I'm beyond the millennial stage, but then you've got all these younger kids that are coming in the millennial era that want to come into the design industry, and then you've got this group of people that are my age, and then we have people like yourself that have been there, done that, and have have everything to prove and show for it. But the reality is that mentoring is so important to help the next generation get a leg up, and it sounds like that's what Art did for you. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think Art was an interesting guy. I really at the time didn't think of him as a mentor, but I was learning tremendously every day
Yeah.
with the firm. And I was a young kid. I remember one day. Here's an example of Art's mentoring, if you will. He used to teach a 2-day course for the American Management Association on facilities,
Okay.
how to design them, how to plan them, how to occupy them, how to get the best mileage within your organization. So I knew he had done these, and he always came back with a couple of new clients from the audience,
Right.
which was always fun. So one day he said, Ed, I want you to come down to LA with me. I'm going to do one of these seminars. Let's do it together. I said, all right. Do you want to give me some advanced material that I can study so I know what we're doing? No. You know it all. Don't worry about it. So we get on the plane to go to Los Angeles, and he hands me a binder about yay thick, and said, "Well, this is the course curriculum." I said, "Oh, geez, why didn't you give me that 2 weeks ago?" So I started thumbing through it. Yes, indeed, it's things we talk about. We talked about those days constantly. So we get into the room, and there's another guy teaching the seminar with him who I'd never met before. Really nice guy, and so he started out with an introduction. And then Art said, yeah, I've got to go to a meeting. Will you please do this next session? I said, what do you mean? What is it? He said, well, here's a carousel of slides. We used slides in those days. He said, here's a carousel of slides. It's about whatever the subject was. Just, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
I finally saw him at lunch. By that time, I'd done 2 other sections.
Right.
And then he did come back for dinner that night. Next day, he flew back to San Francisco, and I finished off the seminar. So mentors, I think, have an obligation. I used to do this as well, of tossing people into the deep end, because that's the way you learn fast. There was a wonderful. I was listening to a TED radio hour while I was exercising yesterday. On, I think it was called Nudge, something to that effect.
Right.
How a small effect can have a major influence on your behavior.
Right.
In this particular section, the moderator was talking about the difference between men and women and how they learn, and how sad it is that men are adventurers. They take chances. They take risks.
Absolutely.
They're encouraged to for the time we're young.
Yeah.
Women, on the other hand, are expected to be perfect all the time.
Right.
And it slows them down. They calibrate where their ability to perform is, and they don't have that same opportunity for advancement. So with guys, and this was the experience I had with Art, he just tossed me in and let me sink or swim.
Yeah.
But the challenge was not to sink.
Yeah.
And that challenge taught me so much over the years.
Yeah.
So I've been a mentor within Gensler. We had a very strong mentor program. One of the things we did frequently was shadowing.
Okay.
In other words, I'd take a young professional who looked like they had a tremendous amount of talent opportunity for growth. And I'd say, by the way, you could sign up for this. You want to shadow me or one of the other principals. Spend a day with me.
Yeah.
And we talked during the day about why I was doing what I was doing. And then I try to look for an opportunity afterward to throw them into a situation that allowed them to explore some of the principles we had talked about. Now, today in Reno, I've joined a group called Summit BMS, which is basically a mentoring program for startup companies here in Reno, not architecture.
Right, just general.
I'm working now with a real estate company and a couple of different firms mentoring young professionals that really want to grow quickly.
Yeah.
I'm loving it because it's so consistent with the way I spent my career.
Wow. Yeah. I love that story. And I too was thrust into a quote unquote setup situation like Art threw you into. And sometimes it's a baptism by fire, but
Sure.
anything that doesn't kill you only makes you stronger.
Absolutely.
So,
Understanding that we're fortunate enough to have grown up in an era where guys were given those opportunities.
yeah.
Girls won't.
Yeah.
I think today what we're finding is I mentored a lot of women. Gensler was always more than 50% women.
Wow.
We
Wow.
were the go-to place for young graduates, women architectural graduates, because they knew they had an equal opportunity within our firm to grow, to advance.
Right. Right.
And I'll tell you, I had some of the strongest women professionals that I could even imagine, and largely because we did exactly that. We placed them in opportunistic situations
Mm-hmm.
that allowed them to be challenged and to learn from it.
Wow.
The best project manager, bar none, ever. In fact, she's back with Gensler now in Boston.
Okay.
She became the director of facilities for Yale. Not Yale. No, it was MIT. I'm sorry, she was with MIT for
one of those Ivy Leagues, right?
Yeah, no, she was terrific. But I always remember I had thrown her into a situation. She came to me out of school and said, I want to experience each part of the profession. I want to spend some time in design. I want to spend some time in production. And then I'd like to be a project manager. And I said, well, that's great. I'm sure I can help you learn. But what are you bringing for credentials? She says, I'm going to learn on the job and I'm going to do great. So she was willing to do that. And I said, you're probably going to take a cut and pay each time you step into a new role because you just don't have the ability. But I'll help you to get that salary right back up there as fast as you can.
Yeah.
So she had gone through the design phase, then she went into production. She was managing a new building. It was about a 10-story office building, Wilshire Boulevard, it was Wilshire Boulevard in West LA. Very nice building, and but it was being built by Tishman Construction, and Tishman Realty was the developer. Well, those are tough New Yorkers. They're just tough. And we got to the end of the project, and instead of paying us the last bill, they handed me a book about of change orders that they felt were our responsibility. So I handed it to Pam, who was the project manager. I said, Pam, why don't we sit down and let's take a look? He says, let me take a look at it. I think I got it under control. I've been hearing rumbles about these things. So she took a look at it. We set a meeting with them. I said, don't you want me to review what you're doing before we go to the meeting? She says, nope, I got it. I got you covered. So we show up at the meeting. We start out with this, and I have no idea what her backup material is. I'm just there for show.
Yeah.
And the first change order comes up. She describes why it's not our responsibility. Goes through all the documentation from the files. We had everything buttoned down.
Right.
And the developer and the contractor looked at it and said, okay, I think you're okay, we'll agree with that. Well, after about 6 of these, the contractor and the developer both said, are they all going to be like this? And she said, mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so we walked out, got a check for our last payment, and went home.
That's it.
I've never been so proud of a single professional in my life than her ability to learn very quickly. What was going to drive a decision on a client's behalf?
Yeah.
And she knew whether it's a design, production, or in project management, she really learned quickly. She learned because she was given an opportunity. She wasn't babysat. She wasn't handheld.
Yeah.
On her own. I've always been very proud of her.
Wow, you know, and that's very interesting that you share that about that interaction with the client. I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are now that you are, quote unquote, can look at things from the other side of the fence, if you will, and you have the perspective that you have with all the years of experience. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that not necessarily young design firms, but that design firms in general are facing in this day and age with everything going on?
Well, I give you two that really resonate for me. One is I moved to Los Angeles in '76 from San Francisco to open our office there. One of the things that I started out trying to do consistently on every project is to have the contractor hired as opposed to a build situation as a collaborator during the design process. Okay. So I've always felt that the strongest way to work is for architect, engineers, contractor, and frankly subcontractors, where you can get them to come and pitch in, to work collaboratively in the design of a building.
Yeah.
And I think in today's litigious society and the challenges of everybody's looking for a way to take some skin out of your hide and put it in their pocket.
Right.
I would love to see this profession shift toward design build, whether it's a formal single enterprise contract where one entity is responsible for design and construction. It doesn't matter. We never had a design build contract where either we were the prime. We did a couple where a developer or the contractor was prime. Those worked out less well, quite honestly.
Yeah.
Because it was less collaborative. Where it was collaborative and to the clients and our mutual benefit, we were doing better buildings at lower cost and higher performance.
Okay.
By working as a team.
Okay.
If you take that as a concept, I'll give you an example of how this works. We were doing a 5-story, very nice mission-style building on the Warner Brothers campus in Burbank. Okay. It was to be a building for talent. So this is producers, directors, and so forth. One of the issues was a very tight budget, and contractor was on board. We worked very closely all the way through until we got to a guaranteed maximum. One of the things I was get rid of that. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. No worries.
One of the things that I was most concerned about was the budget was so tight, we didn't have a really high performance glass in the building.
Okay.
So that meant that you have, and then these were talent people. They like incandescent lamps. They don't like fluorescent lights, which generates more heat in the room. And if you design with less than high performance glass, you design the mechanical system to assume the drapes will be closed or the blinds will be closed when there's sun on the windows.
Right.
And I said, we really can't do that because you're going to have the people living in those offices going to turn on the incandescent lights, leave the drapes open, and they're going to complain that the air conditioning isn't performing properly. No matter how much air you blow in, that much radiant heat load, it's really uncomfortable. So we were out to the end. The contractor was buying each of the subcontracts. And I was looking at something that had come in on the mechanical system, and I said, geez, what if we could build the building with the high-performance glass? Mm-hmm. What would that do to change the design of the mechanical system? So I'm a very creative mechanical engineer on the project, and he said, yeah, well, let me go to work on that. Well, we were able to take one chiller out of the building altogether. We reduced the fan horsepower a lot. We were able to reduce duct sizes. So I went back to the mechanical contractor and said, how much are we going to save on this? You know how much we were going to save? Exactly the cost of the high-performance glass.
Wow.
Now you can't do that on a design, bid, build circumstance.
Right.
There's just not that sense of we're all in this together to do a great building for a client who expects high performance.
Okay.
So I've done that so many times over the years on the work we've done. And I'll scroll that forward to today. I'm now a developer. I'm not an architect
Okay.
anymore.
Okay.
I'm working with a group up here in Reno that is building a large project. It's about 5 million square feet on 17 acres in downtown. It's urban, mid-rise, mixed use, retail on the ground floor, some office space in between, and then residential on top. It's a very important project for Reno because the downtown has been so deteriorated, so dilapidated for so long.
Right.
This is going to connect to the downtown and really it'll be the inspiration for redeveloping the balance of the town. So important project. The architect and developer are one and the same. The architect is the developer.
Okay.
And I'm working very closely with him. The contractor, he has a office building that he rents space to other tenants. One of his tenants is the general contractor. We've rented out space to each of the engineering firms that are working with us. So, like I've described, it's everybody under the same roof.
Right.
We're able to achieve so much more in terms of performance and value for dollars spent by working that way.
Okay.
Now, second case of observations of things like this, what should firms be doing today? In fact, the article I just sent off yesterday to you guys will talk about this, and that's how well do you really know your client?
I like that.
And the subject is, it's not good enough to just take your continuing education courses at the AIA or to become LEED certified or whatever else you do to credential yourself to design things.
Right.
Because that's not what the client wants to talk about. The client wants to talk about what's in it for me.
Right.
When I spend this money, how is it going to change my business behavior? All of our pitch from the very beginning had to do with design has value to alter people's behavior. How is this going to work?
Yeah.
To do that, you've got to know your client's business so thoroughly, as if you started working with your client tomorrow, you would be able to be effective, because you'd know how their business works, who they're selling to, what are the problems of producing whatever it is that they're delivering as value to their customers or clients. How do you know? You got to dig deep. I mentioned Warner Brothers. We did a tremendous amount of work for the film industry over the years because we're in LA. That's a major industry.
Right, right.
One of the things that I figured out very quickly, one of our first clients down there was 20th Century Fox, now 21st Century Fox, but you had to learn how to work with talent. Talent in a movie studio means producers, actors, directors, huge egos.
Yeah.
All they want to talk about is what they're doing. Here's a story. Mel Brooks just turned 90. So one day I'm walking through the executive office building with a roll of drawings, trying to figure out how we're going to reconfigure it to put more people in it. And his arm grabs me and pulls me into the office. And I look at him, it's Mel Brooks. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, we're going to do some reconfiguring. Are you going to move me?" I said, "No, we're not going to move you. We're just trying to figure out how to use this building most effectively." And so he says, "Well, come on in." And then he began to explain to me how he worked. His office was a suite. It had a secretarial area, a little reception seating, and then he had his office. And he said, "Well, here's how I work. If I'm lost, if I'm bored, or if I'm trying to get a new idea, I hang out in the doorway like I did when you came by. And I'll pull somebody in, and then I'll find out if they're worth spending time with. And then you seem to be doing something that you were asking me some good questions. So then I pull them into my office. Now they're trapped. They can't get away." And I said, "Well, that's terrific, Mel. I like the idea." And so he said, "Well, what else are you working on?" And well, we were working on the commissary, redoing the commissary at the time. And he said, "Well, you know how that place should work? Let me explain how it happens. I'm sitting out on that deck, and I want to be able to see who's walking by so I can grab them and talk to them if I want, or I can hide behind a bush so they don't come and pester me. And so we ended up doing a deck out of the commissary that was about 2 feet off the ground. And there was a hedgerow at the edge of the thing. And it worked exactly the way he had proposed. He was thrilled. He said, "Oh, this works for me." Now, that was one minor aspect of the film industry and how people work. But I could go on for days with anecdotes about what I had to learn. I read the Hollywood Reporter, Daily Variety every day.
Yeah.
That's what my clients talked about. Yeah. So if I went to a meeting and I didn't know what was on the front pages during that period of time, I wasn't going to do very well with the conversation with the client because that's what they're interested in.
Yeah.
So it was an absolutely marvelous opportunity.
That's that station that everybody listens to, WIFM. What's in it for me? And it's. I'm glad you mentioned that because that is a major issue in our industry. And I know even when I'm working, as the director of executive search here at Zweig, one of the things that I'm always encouraging the folks that work with me on my team is to learn the industry, understand it, and understand what our clients need more than anything else, and I think we've done a good job at that as a company as a whole in understanding. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I've always resonated with Mark Zweig and just in his advice, because Mark gets it and understands it. I'm always amazed at just his grasping of even minute details of how a firm operates and works. And that's resonated with me and helped me to be a better consultant. You're totally right. I mean, a lot of times when you look at how a company builds and develops business and gets out there, they focus on all the features, but then you got to really get into the benefits. How does it benefit an individual? How does it benefit an organization? And that is so profound and it's actually so simple, right? Because at the end of the day, when we create or design something, we actually are creating it for somebody else, not necessarily for us. But I think it as what I would say, to me, good engineers and good architects are sometimes tortured artists because they get so caught up in what they're creating that they kind of forget the end result and what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. I agree with you that the idea of talking about benefits, not features, operational benefits. Why are we doing this? We're doing this because
it
results in this effect. And I used to coach our guys. We would rehearse presentations we were going to make with a client. And I'd drill people when they'd start talking about the thing they were doing instead of what that thing was going to produce as an effect. Yeah. And any firm can benefit by that particular exercise before you ever make a presentation to a client. Stop, back up, rehearse your presentation so that it's focused completely on benefits, not features. Yeah. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And I like that you said that. I mean, sometimes people go in and, I do some public speaking myself, and people are always amazed when I tell them how many times I'll go over a speech or go over something that I'm going to share before I actually do it. And practice really does make perfect in that area. I think a lot of companies and individuals that are constantly going out to pitch new ideas, pitch new projects, that's an area where if they just slightly improved, they would increase their chances of landing projects at a much higher level than if they just kind of go in and wing it, if you will. And some people feel like, oh, well, just because I'm a great speaker, I feel like I'm a good speaker. People have told me I'm a good speaker, but I always practice. I don't allow that, what people have said about me to get to my head, because I know that I've got to always be on my A game. And to be on my A game, I need to know my material cold.
One of the tools we often used with clients that we were going to be working with over a period of time who didn't have particularly settled ideas about what benefits they were trying to achieve was we'd make, in a sense, a map of the concepts. Basically, it's a big piece of butcher paper up on a wall.
Yeah.
And we'd map out what was important to them. What were the hot buttons? What did they measure? What were they worried about? What were their biggest fears? And then every time we had a presentation, we pin that thing up because often their priorities had changed in a couple of months, something new came up to bite them.
Right.
And so we annotate that mural and continue to monitor it as we went along. Clients would come away from that kind of an experience with an entirely different mindset about what an architect does, because they really felt like we were working for them, not to achieve what we wanted to achieve.
Yeah. Wow. No, that's perfect. I mean, that makes so much sense. And I think, and I'm hoping that people that are in the listening audience will hear what you're saying, because it's just some really good advice that in any industry you could benefit from if you focus on the end result and who you're serving, as opposed to, what you guys, or when I say you guys, what a firm is trying to achieve and accomplish. I mean, again, it's ultimately through what a client would need at the end of the day. And so,
if it's really funny that I wrote a book about 10 years ago now. It was just after I left Gensler, called Long Cycle Strategies for a Short Cycle World. And the concept of the book was we need to always be thinking long in our relationship with each other, with a client, and yet we're driven by short cycle demands so frequently in our interactions. And so I was thinking about, as I was writing that book, I thought, am I writing for architects? I thought, I'm really writing for creative enterprises. And then I started thinking about creative enterprises aren't just design firms or ad agencies. They're really almost every business today. Very few people just buy a widget.
Right.
They're really buying an experience.
Yep.
An automobile today is an entire anthology of self-fulfillment. When you buy a car, you want to identify with the image of that car. If you buy an Aston Martin, you are James Bond.
Right.
It just you really want to create an interaction and a relationship with the person who buys the thing you make, even if it's an object.
Right.
So you create a scenario, a story around what it is. If you're buying a Prius, you have a very different concept than James Bond. And so as you go through your effort of engaging with your customer, they stop becoming customers and they start becoming clients. A customer is a transaction-related relationship.
Right.
In other words, if I'm a customer and you're the purchaser, you think of me like a used car salesman. I'm just trying to move the merchandise.
Exactly.
We are not solving a problem together. We're simply trying to make an exchange. And if I'm a client, we're both sitting on the same side of the table solving a common problem.
Right. Right.
And almost everything that we purchase, I'm talking to you on a Apple MacBook Air.
Yeah.
The purchase of an Apple MacBook Air is anything but the purchase of a product. It's a whole realm of experience that goes along with the Apple relationship.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I'm not making a pitch for Apple here, but I do think
No, trust me, I understand.
The fact that my MacBook Air, my iPhone, and my iPad will all sync up with one another.
Yeah.
So that if I enter your address and phone number in one device, it's immediately in the other devices.
It's beautiful.
That's a pretty cool deal for me.
Yeah, yeah. You sit there and
I really think of all the technology devices that we all use day in and day out. They're not a product anymore. They're a set of experiences that connect to our lives, and if they do it well. My wife today, 6 months ago, she's still on Microsoft, and I think it's Microsoft 10, whatever version 10 came out. Oh my God, the cursing that was going on in this house. Things just weren't working.
Right.
She wasn't getting the support she needed. And,
yeah.
So we do depend heavily on the relationship with the people that represent the organization. It is not a transaction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're right. It's so funny. I mean, everything that you just shared a second ago was probably a lot of stuff that was ruminating in the mind of Steve Jobs as he created a lot of the products that he did create. And his whole idea was the syncopation of all of these different things, ideas coming into one, which is he's created this whole atmosphere or ecosystem of products, which, like you said, works so well. And I mean, it is a form of design if you think about it, and as the same way that we would design buildings and make them beneficial for the end user. But I mean, it's exactly the way that we need to be thinking, as opposed to constantly thinking, from the I perspective. But it's about, how other people are going to view and utilize these things. So,
Yeah, we worked with Steve Jobs on the first several Apple stores.
okay,
So
okay,
that concept I thought was brilliant.
yeah,
Entirely different than any other retail experience that existed at that time.
it is.
The ability for the salesperson with a handheld device to take your credit card, get the machine, and
Right.
hand it to you.
Yeah.
It's not like a checkout counter. And I was in a mall in San Jose the other day, and I had to get some help at the Genius Bar.
Right.
It
Right.
was not working right on my computer. I made an appointment. I went in. My appointment saw me pretty much right on time. As I walked out, just down the hall and across was a Microsoft store.
Right.
Dead in a doornail. People were lined up to get into the Apple store.
Yeah.
So it's been a very successful venture in retailing that's radically different than any retail experience that had ever been had before Steve Jobs stepped into it. Brilliant guy.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Easy ass to work with, by the way.
Right. Well, hey, it's awesome. I mean, it seems like you have. I mean, you've interacted with so many distinct individuals that have kind of given you the framework that you've built on, and what has allowed you to become who you are now. And if you had to give one piece of advice to your former self, someone in the 30 to 45-year-old range, where I guess that's kind of like the sweet spot in this industry, right? When you're between the ages of 30 and 45, you're kind of hitting your stride. And even beyond, I think that's the thing I like about the design industry. You can do this until you're 70 and be successful at it.
Well, yes, I'm 72. Come on.
So yeah, well, exactly, and to me, it's that's when things are just really starting to perk up, and as they say, 70 is the new 40 or something like that, whatever. But the bottom line is that we're able to there is a sweet spot. So if you could give your former selves one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, you may not believe this, but when I was a young professional, I was pretty shy. I didn't have the ability to speak in public, and yet I knew that this profession demanded that I would have to make presentations to planning commissions and architectural review boards, city councils. So I was going to have to be in front of the public. That little city council meeting I described that Art had seen in Tiburon all those years ago, I was shaking in my boots when I was standing in front of that council. I was just scared to death. So I knew I had to improve two things. A was get over my fear of standing in front of an audience. Mm-hmm. And the second thing was being able to be articulate where I was not speaking from the script. I had to be able to speak spur of the moment to respond to questions and so forth. So two things happened to me in those days. One is we got a dictation system in the office, had a central recording device that a couple of secretaries would take stuff off. And then we each had a little handheld, almost like a telephone that we could dictate into backup for. I used to write everything out longhand and then hand it to a secretary to type up. I thought, now here's an opportunity to learn to compose my thoughts. So I worked really hard to write outlines of what I was going to write in a contract, in a specification, in a letter, and then dictate it, which meant I had to be composing in real time. And it took a while, but I got through that aspect. The getting up in front of people without trepidation, you just have to do, but you can get great coaches. I've sent a lot of people through Dale Carnegie over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the clients that I've consulted to, if I detected a shortcoming in their ability to make a decent presentation, I'd get them to do the Dale Carnegie course in the office.
Yeah.
And that sort of coaching. We had a coach in L.A. that someone recommended to me, who had been Ronald Reagan's speech coach when he went into politics. A little short guy from South Africa, smartest guy I've ever met. And we brought him into the office to run several of us through public speaking, presentation, skill building.
Mm-hmm.
Using video. By the way, the hardest thing you ever can do is watch yourself.
Oh.
No,
that's true. Very true.
And so this helped us because that's the way he did it.
Yeah.
He would tape us, and then we'd critique each other.
Yeah.
Once you get over your fear of seeing yourself on television, what you can learn from that experience is gigantic.
Absolutely.
So that was I look at architecture, engineering, anything where we're interacting in this kind of client relationship as a series of conversations that have to feel so comfortable to you. No matter whether you're standing up in front of a board of directors, if you're presenting to a council, you've got to be at ease. You've got to be comfortable, confident, and it's all about benefits, not features.
Exactly.
You have to train that spontaneous response to questions that come up to zero in on what the client's interests are. So that's the advice I've given everybody since I shook myself out of my malaise about public presentations and kind of got over it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's so funny because, we're always talking, and we'll close with this, but whenever I go and we talk about different candidates that we're recruiting, and a client will always ask, well, is this someone that I can put in front of a client, right? That's a big deal. Sometimes we're like, nah, maybe not. And then other times we're like, yeah, you could probably put that person in front of a client. And it's actually one of the bits of encouragement and advice that I give everybody that I come across, especially in this industry, is to figure out a way to get out of your shell and to know who you are and to know what your comfort levels are and to know that you can improve on some of those areas that you think you're weak in just by practice and just kind of getting out of your, like you said, your shell. And it's really important. But Ed, this has just been a wealth of information. We certainly went over what I had planned for, but obviously this can all be used, and we will make good use of this information both on our YouTube channel as well as in our podcast. So we'll go ahead and close out, folks. As a reminder, all Zweig Group Media programs like this one are available free for download on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, just to name a few places. Also, we'd like to thank you for watching this in video format or listening to the podcast by offering you a free copy of the Zweig Letter. Just visit info.zweiggroup.com/free TZL. A link to all of this information will be in our show notes, including information with a link to Ed's blog, as well as, Ed, if you'd like to share your email address, if anyone wants to contact you, we'll be more than happy to do that. What's your email address?
Ed@friedrichsgroup.com.
Okay. All right. We'll be sure to have that in the show notes and make sure that anybody that needs to reach out to you will be able to do that. I'm sure you'll get some feedback from this interview. And then finally, if you're really in the giving mood, feel free to share this link with your friends. It's kind of like spreading the love and the knowledge all wrapped up in one. I'm Randy Wilburn, and you've been listening to Zweig Group Media, part of the Zweig Group. We exist to make you more successful. Thanks so much, and bye for now.